Every Wednesday at the 12:35 hour, we have our new contributor, Ken Bombace. Ken is a great asset to our midday show. Ken is the CEO of Global Threat Solutions. He does security consultant, protection services, intelligence offices in New York and L.A. Ken is also a former Army intelligence captain that led counterinsurgency operations in Samarra, Iraq, retired criminal intel detective. He's also a professor of criminal justice at Farmingdale. He served in Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall and served at Ground Zero. Again, you'll hear Ken every Wednesday at the 12:35 hour. Ken Bombace, my friend, how are you?
How's it going, Tom? Great to be on.
Well, a lot going on. The President of the United States just finished his speech at the United Nations, and to many people's surprise, it actually was a strong speech. I watched the whole thing, and he came right out of the box because Vladimir Putin went before his people in a televised address saying that they're not taking any more nonsense from the Ukraine and that all avenues are on the table, and he did use the nuclear threat. This is beyond belief. I mean, I look at this and it's incomprehensible to me that this has been going on since February. We're seeing the devastation and destruction in the Ukraine, and the Ukrainian wars of liberation are very difficult when we study history, and that it's the countries that are trying to liberate themselves from the aggressor, in this case the Russians, they're rising up. They're doing a damn good job with the limited resources that they have against the so-called Russian Federation, however that's going to be. So now that Vladimir Putin is a rat trapped in a corner, is threatening that nuclear sword of Damocles, which will change the nature of the current day international relationships that we have with other countries. If you had to take your expertise, is this man serious?
So the short answer would have to be yes. I mean, I do think that is a last resort, even for Vladimir Putin, the nuclear option. I also think it's probably not what most people think of when they think the nuclear option. It should be a low-yield tactical nuke, a battlefield nuke, which is completely devastating and a massive violation of international law. And by the way, would impact nations bordering there. But it's not what we all grew up understanding as nuclear war. What I would say, Tom, is that's a last resort for him. He's putting it out there because he's like a trapped rat right now. However, as we both know, Ukraine has had these tremendous counteroffensive success over the last few weeks. They've taken back over 10% of what Russia has taken since the beginning of this invasion, and key territory in the northeast by Kharkiv. So now they've pushed the Russians back so far, but now what they have two strategies. One of them is he just mobilized, I think, 300,000 troops, because that was a big problem they're having. It's a war of attrition, and they just don't have enough troops on the battlefield to withstand this, the Russians. So he finally got the lower house of parliament through of a partial mobilization. Now, that's going to give him the forces he needs to try and launch another counteroffensive of his own. However, he also has another strategy where they have these Russian-backed officials in these certain parts of Ukraine where Russia has had power. They're doing a referendum, and they're going to do that in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and even the area where they have the nuclear power plant, which is key. And the reason they're doing this, they want to have this sham vote, is because Russia wants to be able to say, Vladimir Putin wants to be able to say, now Ukraine's attacking Russia. That's our land, and they're attacking us. That gives him a whole new set of powers where he could do a full mobilization of the Russian people. That's why they're doing that and prepping for that, and that's going to be soon, that vote. They just postponed it once, but it'll be soon. So, yeah, this is a dangerous situation, and do I put it past him? If he, he's not a good loser, Tom, and do I put it past him to do that as a last resort? I would say we need to be prepared, and I'll tell you right now, there's people in the Pentagon planning for that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, when one thinks about it, it creates the word unimaginable, but maybe we start to have to imagine it. And it just so happens that he picked the day when the President of the United States was addressing the United Nations, the General Assembly. And Joe Biden came right out of the box kicking. I mean, right away. against it. It was all about Vladimir Putin to a large extent when he first started speaking, and the need for the unity among nations, and the fact of Russia considering such an option that would have an impact. And I think you alluded to it. Radioactive clouds don't know no borders, so to speak. And right. That can impact NATO in a very, very serious manner. So, there's some, a lot of times we all get wrapped up in our local politics and the divisions of this country and so on. But now we're looking at a real, what I consider a very serious threat that all Americans should pay very close attention to. Ken?
That's exactly right. I mean, I've been saying this so much on your show. We've been talking about this. We are so hyper-focused on this domestic nonsense that we deal with every single day. I was listening in before I came on. And yes, now there's another lawsuit by the New York State Attorney General against President Trump. I mean, at a point, I don't even know the tally right now. I think she's sued him several times already. I mean, it becomes white noise. And I'm not even thinking about the validity of it. It doesn't matter at this point. It doesn't matter. It's so hyper political. We have real issues, in my opinion, with my experience. This is the most dangerous time in American history that I've lived through, definitely, right now, where we have, it isn't even like the Cold War, Tom, where there was a sense of stability with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc and the Allies and our allies, because everyone knew. They knew the repercussions if somebody were to ever do that, and people treaded very lightly because of that. We have someone who's unstable. We have someone involved in a very hot war right now in Eastern Europe who's verbally threatening the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, to me, the fact that we are talking about such nonsense every day is crazy. And as far as President Biden's speech goes, yeah, I mean, listen, I support everything he says. How could you not support condemning Vladimir Putin? And as far as expanding the UN Security Council, the permanent members he recommended, I would be behind that. I mean, I think Japan, I know he's supported adding them in the past. I think that would make sense in a lot of ways. The only thing is we have to remember, right now we have the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China. We have to remember that every member of the permanent members of the UN Security Council have a unilateral veto power. So I'm not sure it would have a drastic impact right now, as far as Russia being a member of that. And President Biden, even with everything that's happening, he did hold short of calling for Russia to be removed from the council, which I think should have been done a long time ago. I mean,
Yeah. At the very least, I'll say these are very interesting times, and that we all should be cautious in how we watch the news and so on, and keep an eye on it. And again, keep our dialogue going that we do here on this show, because I think it is that important. And certainly it starts off with the Ukrainian war, and now statements being made by Putin, because we could see he did suffer some pretty serious setbacks. And before we get off the topic, just your analysis of the counter-offensive by the Ukrainians. Is it showing that there's light at the end of the tunnel for them in terms of victory, or is this just going to possibly lead to a further punishment? Because, again, using the phrase that you and I both did, you have a trapped rat here.
Yeah, so it's a little of both, Tom. It's like they have shown great success. They have the support of the allies. That's helped a lot, too. But the Ukrainian military was underestimated by the world. They're smaller, but a well-trained military. And most people overestimated the capabilities of the Russian military. So that's one thing. And now we've seen this great success where they're pushing Russia all the way out into the northeast of Ukraine and taking land that Russia had already possessed. So that in itself is great. Wow, Ukraine's, they're really making progress. The fear that everyone has who follows this is, what is his response going to be? No one has this. I don't think anyone has this image where Vladimir Putin's going to say, all right, let's seek diplomatic solution right now. That is not even a reality, just knowing his personality. That's the fear. Will he resort to this escalate to de-escalate policy that the Russians have, where they use a tactical nuclear weapon when things get so bad, just to stop the fighting? That's a possibility. So as successful it is as it's been, everyone's kind of watching this very closely because we're nervous about their success. The Ukrainians, how far can they push before he's going to do something drastic? So, and then the other issue, if we ever do get to the point, Tom, where there's going to be a diplomatic solution to this, the sticking point is Vladimir Putin wants these regions that he has, he took in 2014 it was, in Crimea. He wants certain areas that he now possesses, but they're under Russian control. Meanwhile, President Zelensky says, I want all of Ukraine. Nothing is acceptable, not an inch. So, that's a sticking point right there. You would have to see, I think, a concerted effort by say, the UN Security Council to come in, all of those members on one page and say, listen, enough's enough. We need to stop this war and find a solution. Maybe it's going to take a few years. Maybe Russia's going to maintain those areas for now. Just something to stop the destruction and the death. I think that's the only possibility we're going to have is countries like China, for instance, convincing Vladimir Putin, all right, let's seek another solution to this.
Yeah. It's almost like, though, many of us are waiting for, again, leader of the free world, the President of the United States, to take the lead on initiating peace talks. Because I know if the world community starts saying we got to get to the table, but there is no table. From my understanding, unless it's being done secretly, which it could very well be, there should be a sitting down and trying to work this out. People are dying. There's no other way to put it. This is a war. War is horrific. War is something that the human race should have done away with centuries ago, but we haven't. We're still doing it. And again, something that many people are looking at. From your background in intelligence work, could there be secret peace talks going on?
Oh, I'm sure there's communication going on that the general public does not know about between the West and Russia, even if it's through intermediaries like India and China. I'm sure there's communications. We even communicate directly with Russia for certain things to avoid an escalation as far as our military movements and stuff. But I would like to think that there was a meeting just recently this week in Uzbekistan where India and China, two countries that have somewhat, at a minimum, taken a middle ground stance or supported Russia even a little bit, they have stepped back and showed real concerns for this war continuing, and they made that clear to Vladimir Putin. So I'd like to think that they are now communicating with them directly and saying, listen, there's a time for this, it's a time we need to start de-escalating this conflict. That, I think, is one way we could find peace. The other one is going to be the Russian people, because there's evidence now that Russian elected officials even have grouped together. Some of them have called for Vladimir Putin to step down, which sounds crazy. That's a bold move. But also, even for him to be impeached, he's not impervious to domestic politics and pressures from domestic politics. I know he's a dictator, but he still has to put up that front, and he still has to answer to the Russian people. I think those are our two best bets for a peaceful solution. Is going to be maybe China and India and some countries that were sort of allied with him, or at least still working with him, having condemned him, putting pressure on him, and then the Russian people themselves. And like you said, Tom, I'd love to see our president take a lead. It's great to stand up and constantly condemn them, and Vladimir Putin needs to be condemned. But at one point, we have to start talking. When there's no talking, that's not good.
It's very important. And all of this against the backdrop of this morning, an American astronaut hitched a ride with the Soyuz spacecraft being launched from the Space Center inside of the Russian Federation in order to link up to get to the ISS. And I've always looked at that as been such a wonderful thing with the cooperation between Russia and the United States in space. And it's still going on today. And it was a successful launch. The American astronaut was a medical doctor, and he's going to go up there and they're going to do experiments on a lot of the different viruses and diseases that exist on Earth. And so we see something like that, and it's almost an anomaly. We end up scratching our heads and saying, how can in one breath threaten nuclear war, and on the other breath that we work together with the wonderful aspects, the scientific accomplishments of the International Space Station? You have to wonder about the human race. But let's get back closer to the United States. The border dispute this morning, the migrants that were sent to Martha's Vineyard by Ron DeSantis filed a lawsuit against Ron DeSantis. I mean, I don't, I start to stutter when things like that happen. They're suing DeSantis because they said DeSantis went up against his promises and sent them to this place, and they didn't know about it. Ron DeSantis, who happens to be a graduate of Harvard Law School, made sure they all signed releases. But they're American ambulance chaser attorneys who really filed this lawsuit. They're looking for a big payday. Basically said they didn't understand what they did sign. Where do you begin on a discussion on this, Ken?
It's like almost childish now. Now they're going to have a sheriff criminally investigate the governor of Florida, and they're basically saying this is inhumane and we can't believe this has happened. And it's the exact same thing that this administration has done. They were sending, only they weren't announcing it. They were sending people to different states in flights in the middle of the night all over the country. We heard no opposition to that. We heard no one push back on that. Definitely not from the left anyway, in the Democratic Party. So that's when it's the hypocrisy. It seems that's all we talk about nowadays, Tom. It's just hypocrisy, and that's the problem. Whether you have a valid point or not, when you have no credibility, people don't listen. People turn it off. People don't want to listen to this anymore. And same thing like we saw in Mar-a-Lago. Same thing. It's hypocrisy. But when you look at the border right now, I would say this: that if it takes governors to send buses of these migrants to different states to get attention to this issue, listen, it's their own fault in some ways in this administration. This is our second year. They've never been to the border. The entire country knows it's the biggest crisis we've ever faced there. They act like it doesn't exist. They're just ignoring the problem, and that's not good enough. So what is happening? Yeah, there were some buses sent out, but it's in the news every day. People are talking about it. It brings attention to it. So how could you counter that? How could you say that wasn't worthwhile? At least we're having this conversation now, because right now the numbers, Tom, are striking. They said between the 18 and 45-year-olds, fentanyl is the leading cause of death in America. That's insane, right? We've had 900,000 known gotaways in 2021 and 2022. That's crazy. That's more than the population of San Francisco, right? I mean, that's a huge number. We have 12 known terrorists that were apprehended at the southern border just in August. 750 people have died crossing the southern border this year, more than 2 per day. And that's coming from this administration's Department of Homeland Security. These are crazy numbers right now. And at the end of this year, they say that over 4 million people have crossed the border in the last 2 years under President Biden's leadership. That's 6 times the population of Washington, D.C. And there's a huge problem. And if it takes a couple busloads of people to get attention to the issue, I guess you got to try. That's all I could say.
But it's very clear that the people that are going on those buses are being well treated, getting medical care if need be, getting the proper amount of food and water and nutrition that they need, being treated extremely well. And they go to New York City. It's almost like they're in Hawaii, where they lay that thing over your head and they're cheering you on. The people have their thumbs up when they're getting off the bus. It seems kind of nice to me. And yet now you get these lawyers that, for whatever reason, see a payday, so they file a lawsuit on behalf of the people that were bussed. In some cases, I think it was to Martha's Vineyard. It goes along to the sublime of the ridiculousness, and that's where we are right now. The American people don't have time for this. Ken, we got about 40 seconds left. Just finish this up.
Yeah, it's exactly what you just said. We don't have time for this. The midterms are approaching, and I hate that we're talking about nonsense. We should be talking about China and Russia and the threats that we face right now, as well as inflation and an economy that's struggling, things that are affecting people every single day. Those are real issues that should be talked about in America right now, not this nonsense. That's all we hear about all day, and I think we need to move away from that, Tom.